What if I told you that the first families of the United States, the ones that were supposed to represent the very best of our nation, also had their fair share of scandals? Behind the grandeur of the White House and the polished public images, many members of these families lived lives filled with affairs, secrets, and controversies that were kept out of the history books. These are the stories that were hidden from us, tucked away behind velvet curtains, oil portraits, and some very well-crafted public images. Today, we are diving deep into the untold stories of the most promiscuous members of the US. First families, those who were part of the political elite, but whose private lives were filled with scandal and forbidden relationships. The ones whose affairs and missteps remained a well-kept secret for years. So grab a drink, make yourself comfortable, and let's uncover the darker, juicier side of American history. 1. John F. Kennedy. We all know John F. Kennedy, the young, charismatic president who led America through some of the most turbulent years of the 20th century. From his powerful speeches to his strong stance on civil rights, JFK is remembered as a political giant. But what you might not know is that the man who gave us hope and inspiration also had a far less noble side. Behind that polished exterior was a man who couldn't keep his hands to himself, especially when it came to the ladies. JFK was famous for his charm, but it wasn't just his political brilliance that made him irresistible. No, his real power lay in his ability to woo women. From Hollywood starlets to secretaries, no woman was safe from his advances. And while he was married to Jacqueline Kennedy, one of the most beloved first ladies in history, his affairs were numerous and kept very, very quiet. Take Marilyn Monroe, for example, the iconic actress who had a brief but unforgettable affair with JFK. But Monroe wasn't the only one. There were countless others, and many of them were part of the president's inner circle. Some say it was a way for Kennedy to assert his power. Others claim it was simply his nature. Whatever the reason, JFK's private life was a web of hidden affairs, and the American public had no idea. Even more shocking, the stories that came out after his death. There were rumors of affairs with other famous figures, and whispers about the ways in which the Kennedy family tried to protect the president's image. They went to great lengths to hide his sexual exploits, knowing that revealing the truth would have shattered the perfect image of America's golden boy. 2. Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, let's talk about Lyndon B. Johnson, the man who became president after Kennedy's assassination. While LBJ might not be remembered for his Hollywood looks or his youthful charm, he certainly had his own way of attracting attention, especially when it came to his relationships. LBJ was known for his wild, larger-than-life persona, and when it came to women, he didn't hold back. In fact, LBJ's love life was a bit of an open secret. While he was married to Lady Bird Johnson, a strong and dignified First Lady, Johnson's sexual escapades were far from private. He was known to have numerous affairs throughout his presidency, some of which were rumored to have taken place in the White House itself. But what made LBJ's affairs stand out wasn't just their number, it was the audacity with which he lived them. Johnson didn't hide his relationships the way other presidents might have. He was blatant about it, even sometimes joking about his conquests in front of his staff. His reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted extended into his romantic life, making him a particularly controversial figure. It's said that even in the Oval Office, LBJ had little shame when it came to his liaisons. Stories abound of him using his power to get what he wanted, and it was no secret that he had a lot of women on his radar. Of course, LBJ was a master of manipulation, so he could charm anyone, and that made him one of the most dangerous, but also most fascinating, figures in American politics. 3. Bill Clinton. We can't talk about the first families and their scandals without mentioning Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton is remembered for many things: his economic policies, his foreign diplomacy, and of course, his infamous affair with Monica Lewinsky. But what you might not know is that this wasn't his first foray into scandalous behavior. In fact, Bill Clinton had quite a history with women, a history that would later catch up with him. Clinton, much like Kennedy, was a charming and charismatic leader who used his charm to get what he wanted. Whether it was while he was governor of Arkansas or in the White House, Clinton had a way of making women swoon. But it wasn't just his charm, it was his power. Women were drawn to him, and he was drawn to them. But the most famous scandal of all? The affair with Monica Lewinsky. The affair that would shake his presidency to its core, lead to an impeachment trial, and permanently tarnish his image. What made this scandal particularly explosive was the way it was exposed, publicly, through the media, and with the entire world watching. It didn't just ruin his political career, it created a permanent cloud over his legacy. The Clinton scandal also highlighted something darker about the first family: the way power can be used to manipulate and deceive. The affair was kept secret for months, only coming to light when an investigation exposed the truth. And even then, Clinton tried to maintain his public image, eventually apologizing to the nation and denying any wrongdoing beyond the affair itself.
4. Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Let's move away from the more recent presidents for a moment and go back to Franklin D. Roosevelt. FDR, the 32nd president, is remembered for his leadership during the Great Depression and World War II. His New Deal programs are etched in American history. But what many don't know is that his personal life was far from perfect. While FDR was married to the ever-gracious Eleanor Roosevelt, his love life outside of their marriage was far more complicated. Eleanor and Franklin had a partnership that was political, but not always romantic. Eleanor knew about FDR's infidelities, and she often turned a blind eye. In fact, she even had her own relationships outside the marriage, including a long-rumored romance with her friend and journalist, Lorena Hickok. But it was Franklin's affairs with other women that grabbed the most attention. His most famous lover was Lucy Mercer, a woman who many believe he had a deep emotional connection with. Their relationship was so intense that Eleanor knew about it, and it is said to have been one of the main reasons for the couple's emotional distance later in life. The Roosevelt family was careful about maintaining appearances, but their private lives were filled with tension and scandal. The Roosevelts, it seems, lived under a public microscope, and their personal lives were subject to the same scrutiny as their political careers. 5. Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Let's go back to the third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. Known for drafting the Declaration of Independence and shaping the nation's future, Jefferson is one of America's most revered figures. But, like many of his contemporaries, Jefferson had a side to him that history has been more hesitant to discuss. Behind the walls of Monticello, Jefferson's personal life was far more complicated. Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman of mixed race, is widely believed to have had a long-term relationship with Jefferson, and they are thought to have had several children together. This wasn't just some brief affair, it lasted for decades, though it was kept quiet, especially since Jefferson was, at the time, the President of the United States. The affair was a closely guarded secret for many years. Though Hemings was never formally acknowledged as Jefferson's lover during his lifetime, historical evidence points to a deep emotional and sexual relationship between the two. DNA testing in the late 1990s confirmed that Jefferson almost certainly fathered at least one of Hemings' children. What makes this story particularly scandalous isn't just the relationship between Jefferson and Hemings, but the fact that he was one of the leading advocates for freedom and liberty in a nation built on the ideals of equality, all while keeping a woman enslaved and in a relationship that was taboo even by the standards of his time. 6. Franklin Pierce and the tragic loss of his son. Moving on to another president with a troubled personal life, let's talk about Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States. Though his time in office is often overshadowed by the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, Pierce's personal life was filled with tragedy and heartache. Pierce was married to Jane Means Appleton, and their life was one of apparent happiness. However, this all changed when, just before he assumed the presidency, the couple's only surviving son, Benny, died in a train accident. The grief of losing their son haunted both Franklin and Jane, but it hit Franklin especially hard. In fact, his sorrow over Benny's death likely played a large role in his inability to be an effective leader during his presidency. But what was even more troubling was Franklin's relationship with his wife, Jane. After their son's death, Jane reportedly never fully recovered emotionally. She became deeply depressed, and she avoided the public eye, leaving her husband to navigate the political landscape alone. There were rumors that the loss of Benny had strained their marriage, with Pierce often seeking solace in the company of other women. While the details remain murky, the emotional turmoil within the Pierce household definitely played a part in his presidency's disarray. 7. John Adams and Abigail Adams' complex marriage. John Adams, the second President of the United States, had a marriage that was, by all accounts, one of the most intellectual and emotionally charged relationships in American history. His wife, Abigail Adams, is revered as one of the nation's most influential women, with her letters to her husband offering a window into their lives and the nation's early days. However, their relationship wasn't without its difficulties. John and Abigail's marriage was marked by long separations, especially when John Adams was away in Europe on diplomatic missions. During these long absences, their correspondence was constant, and it's clear that they deeply loved one another. But there was a certain level of emotional distance in their relationship, caused by their political ambitions and the pressures of the times. But here's where it gets more interesting. Abigail, who was very forward-thinking for her time, often challenged her husband in ways that pushed him toward political decisions that many of his contemporaries found radical. Some scholars believe that Abigail may have had more influence over John Adams' policies than we realize. Was it just intellectual partnership, or were their letters an emotional tool Abigail used to subtly control the direction of his actions? The couple's relationship, while deeply loving, was also filled with political manipulation, not just between John and Abigail, but within the entire Adams family. For all the love they shared, their partnership was also built on power dynamics that, in their own way, shaped the direction of early American politics. 8. Andrew Jackson and Rachel Jackson's scandalous marriage. Next, let's turn to Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, a man who is both beloved and controversial in American history. Known for his military victories and his role in the expansion of American democracy, Jackson's personal life was a roller coaster ride of scandal, heartbreak, and defiance. Jackson's marriage to Rachel Donaldson was nothing short of scandalous. The two married in 1791, but there was a complicated twist to their relationship. Rachel was already legally married to another man when she wed Jackson. She had separated from her first husband, but the divorce was not finalized before Jackson married her, leading many to label their union as adulterous. The political opposition during Jackson's rise to power seized upon this scandal, using it as ammunition to discredit him. Jackson, already known for his fiery temper, was deeply hurt by these attacks. The scandal took a toll on Rachel, who became ill and, tragically, died just before Jackson was inaugurated as president. Andrew Jackson would go on to blame his political enemies for her death, fueling his bitterness toward the political elite for the rest of his life. 9. Theodore Roosevelt and his emotional outbursts. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, was a figure who embodied American strength, vigor, and masculinity. A Rough Rider who led troops in battle and a president who expanded the national park system, Roosevelt's legacy is still celebrated today. But beneath this larger-than-life persona, Roosevelt's life was full of emotional turmoil, especially concerning his relationships with his family. One of the most fascinating, though less discussed, aspects of Roosevelt's personal life was his often explosive temper and his complicated relationship with his wife, Edith Kermit Caro. Though they married after being childhood sweethearts, Roosevelt's emotional volatility was no secret in the marriage. He would have frequent emotional outbursts, especially when faced with political or personal stress. His intense relationship with Edith often bordered on obsession. Though he admired her deeply, Roosevelt's own need for dominance and power occasionally spilled over into their marriage, creating tension and forcing Edith to often act as a stabilizing influence. Despite their tumultuous relationship, Edith was fiercely loyal to him, and it was clear that she was the quiet strength behind his presidency. Still, Theodore's temper and complex emotions made their marriage far from ideal. 10. Harry S. Truman and his secrets. Let's move on to the 33rd President, Harry S. Truman. Known for his decisive leadership during the end of World War II and his decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan, Truman is regarded as one of the most straightforward and unassuming presidents in history. But like many of his predecessors, Truman's personal life wasn't as simple as it appeared. Truman's marriage to Bess Wallace, whom he married in 1919, was a long and steady one. They had known each other since childhood, and Bess was known to be a very private person. But what many don't know is that Truman's relationship with his wife was more distant than it seemed. Bess was often out of the public eye during Truman's presidency, and it was rumored that their marriage was plagued by emotional distance. What makes Truman's personal life even more intriguing is his alleged involvement with other women during his presidency. While there's no solid evidence, some historians speculate that Truman, often under pressure from his political duties and isolation in the White House, might have sought comfort outside of his marriage. One of the most famous whispers in Washington was about his rumored affair with a woman named Margaret Truman, a reporter for the New York Times. But, as with many scandals of the time, these rumors were hushed up, and Truman's public image remained that of a devoted, no-nonsense president. 11. Richard Nixon and the women in his life. Next up, Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States. Nixon is one of the most complex figures in American history, primarily remembered for his involvement in the Watergate scandal that ultimately led to his resignation. But before Watergate, Nixon had his own personal scandals involving relationships and emotional complexities. Nixon's wife, Pat Nixon, was a quiet, supportive figure who largely stayed out of the public spotlight. However, Nixon was not always the loyal husband we would expect from someone in his position. He was known for having an extremely complicated relationship with women, often using his position for favors and to make personal connections. While there were never direct, confirmed affairs during his presidency, Nixon's interactions with women were often seen as inappropriate. He frequently used his power to charm women, sometimes even with sexual undertones, and rumors about his extramarital activities spread throughout Washington. His emotional distance from Pat, combined with his deep-rooted paranoia and ambitious nature, led to many people speculating about his personal life. However, Nixon's most damaging relationship was with his own political ambition, which drove him to compromise his values in pursuit of power, including disregarding personal and ethical boundaries. His need to control every aspect of his public and private life may have played a key role in his eventual downfall. 12. Dwight D. Eisenhower and his close relationship with Kay Summersby. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president, is remembered for his military success as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force during World War II and his leadership in the post-war years. But despite his iconic status, Eisenhower's private life holds its own share of secrets. While married to the very dignified Mamie Eisenhower, Eisenhower had a close and controversial relationship with his personal driver during the war, Kay Summersby. Though their relationship was never definitively proven to be romantic, it has been the subject of much speculation. Summersby was not just Eisenhower's driver. She became a confidant, a personal aide, and, at times, a companion during the war years. Their bond was so strong that many who were close to them speculated that it was more than just professional. What's most intriguing is that, after the war, Eisenhower did his best to suppress any evidence of their affair, leaving only vague, open-ended stories about the nature of their relationship. Mamie Eisenhower, his wife, was not oblivious to the closeness between the two, but chose to stay silent. The official narrative remained that it was a purely professional relationship, but those who were around Eisenhower at the time had a different take. 13. Bill Clinton's unconventional presidency. We can't talk about the first families without revisiting the infamous Clinton scandal, the affair between Bill Clinton and White House intern Monica Lewinsky. It's a moment in history that almost everyone remembers, but there's much more to the story than just the public disgrace. Bill Clinton, the 42nd president, was known for his charm, intelligence, and political skill, but his relationship with women was, shall we say, less than ideal. While married to Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton was known to have numerous affairs, but none more public than his involvement with Monica Lewinsky. What began as an inappropriate encounter in the Oval Office escalated into a full-blown scandal that would haunt Clinton's presidency. Clinton, under investigation for other alleged misdeeds, famously denied the affair, famously stating, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." The scandal, and the subsequent impeachment trial, left a permanent mark on Clinton's legacy. While he was acquitted in the Senate, the damage to his reputation was done. For years, Clinton's personal life was the subject of tabloids, TV specials, and endless commentary, all while he continued his presidency with an approval rating that remained higher than expected. 14. John F. Kennedy's love affairs beyond Marilyn Monroe. We've already touched on JFK's love life earlier, but let's go into a little more detail. Kennedy's affairs with Marilyn Monroe, while widely publicized, were just the tip of the iceberg. Throughout his presidency, JFK was rumored to have had numerous affairs, many of them with women who were deeply connected to the political and social elite of the time. His relationships were a well-guarded secret, with only a handful of people in Washington knowing the full extent of his escapades. In addition to Monroe, other women in his circle, including actresses, models, and even his sister-in-law, were believed to have been involved with the president. One of his most notable affairs was with Judith Exner, a socialite who had connections to both JFK and mobsters. It was said that Exner was not just a lover of Kennedy's, but also acted as an intermediary between the president and the mafia. The White House was a place filled with secrets, and JFK's personal life was just one of the most well-kept secrets of all. After his death, stories of his affairs were leaked to the media, cementing his reputation as a tragically flawed figure, even as he remained one of the most beloved presidents in American history. 15. The Kennedy Curse. Now, let's return to the Kennedys, but this time, let's focus on the larger family. The Kennedy family has long been synonymous with power, tragedy, and scandal. Known as America's royal family, the Kennedys have produced a long line of influential politicians, but also a long list of tragic events that are often seen as a curse. From JFK's assassination to the tragic death of his brother Robert Kennedy, the Kennedys have had their share of misfortune. But the family's dark side also includes hidden scandals. The sexual exploits of various Kennedy family members, including the affairs of Robert Kennedy and his notorious relationships with women during his time in office, have been the subject of much speculation. In particular, Ted Kennedy's relationship with the death of Mary Jo Kopechne, which led to the infamous Chappaquiddick incident, remains one of the darkest chapters in the family's history. These events, coupled with the relentless tragedies, make the Kennedy family's history one of the most fascinating and unsettling in American politics.